Shalom, friends! Welcome to Orange Socks, a podcast celebrating Jewish creativity. I'm your host, Yitzchak Muli, inviting you to join me in exploring the soul of Jewish expression. Shalom, friends, and welcome to Orange Socks Studio. It has been a while. I took a break for the month of Tishrei, finally back in the studio and back to recording, and I have the honor of having Miriam Leah with me. Miriam Leah, welcome.
Thanks.
Hello. Yes.
Thanks for having me on my couch.
Make yourself at home. Be comfortable.
I'll totally make myself at home.
So
great. Technology.
You were on a long drive back to Montreal not that long ago, and
when I left the podcast in your voice notes.
You listened. It was a long drive. You listened to a number of these episodes, and you had a lot of feedback. You had a lot to share, and some of the things that were said here, as far as I remember, touched you. So it's good to know that this podcast is doing something and touching people's lives and connecting to creators. So
yes,
number one,
props to all of the previous interviewees. Thank you for the depth.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, since I have children and I'm getting up in years, so I have no recollection of what I thought at this point. You could jog my memory.
I don't. The truth is, to be honest, I don't remember what you said, but how you said it, or the fact that you said it, or the feedback, that there was feedback.
Definitely had. Which is why I left the messages for you then, because the next day.
Play them back. So yes, this is Orange Socks Studios. This is the Orange Socks podcast, and really we're exploring that intersection of Judaism and creativity. And I believe you got a lot to share on that topic.
I can share whatever is what I've done in my life or what my thoughts are, and you can, I guess, any listener can decide if it's a contribution or not. I only hope that, something that I've done is worth listening, worth this minute that they spend listening.
So you have ATARA. Do we begin with ATARA, or do we begin with your background and your entry into both Judaism and creativity? Where would you like to begin?
Well, ATARA emerged from, I suppose, it was part of the journey. So,
all right. So let's start at the beginning.
ATARA was
start at the beginning.
Just me as a performer. I studied musical theater, and I suppose a highlight of my journey towards becoming observant is that I thought that I would never be involved in music again after I left the world of musical theater. And lo and behold, I encountered the Moshav band, the Solomon brothers, who were, in the Moshav band at the time. And it was a portal to becoming, more observant, in the sense that I could relate to, I respected them as musicians, and yet they were also observant. So music was also a doorway in, and, the Trugmans and, just having that whole culture. So that was the culture that brought me in.
Okay. Let's take a few steps back. Where did you grow up? Where's your...
I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Okay. And what was your
amazing community? So the shul, the Tree of Life shul that was on the news, unfortunately for a terrorist attack, was my home shul. Wow. I was bat mitzvahed. I spent all of the bat mitzvah years were, so Hebrew school was every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday morning. And we, played throughout the halls and the bathrooms. We sort of, knew every corner of the shul. And and I was there, so I knew some of the people that had been shot, because they were congregants.
Right.
And so that's where I grew up, conservative synagogue. But Squirrel Hill is a community where geographically there's overlap between the Orthodox and the non-Orthodox. So there's a JCC, but I grew up attending the JCC and programs at the JCC. But once I became more observant, it was the same neighborhood, with the kosher grocery. I just hadn't seen it before. I just didn't realize that there was a Kalim mikvah down the street. So, yeah, that's where I grew up, and so then, yeah, fast forward to, any other questions about my...
Well, no, your Judaic
upbringing.
journey. How did you...
Right.
It's that
Okay,
interplay
I think
between
I was
the Judaism and the creativity, and which
fair.
one led which, and
Fair. Fair. So they were separate entirely. I was a conservative Jew, but I always identified as a Jew. The JCC was a second home growing up. I was not very good at basketball, but I was at the basketball, for middle school, and the plays. But then in high school, I was cast as Anne in the Diary of Anne Frank. And it rolled from there that this was a talent, that I had to perform. But I studied musical theater.
That
I
was your
think
opening
so.
act. That was the first time that you got on
Sort
stage
of.
and felt comfortable and kind of leaned into the role.
So my first was at a Jewish summer camp, not Orthodox, but I chose drama, and it was the part of Really Rosie, and I probably was 10 years old, but I was cast as the lead role, and it was just the whole play revolved around this one character. And so since then, I had a hush, I suppose, but I studied musical theater on Shabbos. That's what I did all day long. While other people ate cholent, I went to, classes in musical theater. And
As a child growing up.
As a child growing up, that was like a Saturday, instead of a Sunday program, for non-Orthodox Jews, it's a Saturday program. So, it followed that I would pursue musical theater potentially, and I then got into a conservatory musical theater program, and that led to the Jewish journey. But the Judaism and the musical theater were separate. But that did lead to the Judaism in the sense that I was a musical theater major, and I had always wanted to follow in the steps of Grace Kelly, who was a French princess, an actress who became a princess. So I thought, of course, I'll go off to France and become royalty myself. Of course, now I live in Quebec, so the French followed me, right? I don't know if it's a royalty, but but because I had been studying the arts, I wasn't allowed to. I had too many arts credits, so I couldn't take language credits. So therefore, Nebuch, I had to go to Jerusalem. So as my consolation prize, I might as well learn about Judaism. And at the time I thought Jerusalem, I'll learn about all three world religions. I'll go to Jerusalem, I'll learn about Islam, and I'll do comparative religions. So that was the plan. And yeah. So that brought me to Israel, and
this is already in your college years.
Right. I was always an identifying Jew. I went to Jewish summer camp, affiliated with the JCC. Like I was a Jew-y, I was proud of my Judaism. Along the journey, I would say Benny Friedman, his wife is from Pittsburgh. He's a a Rav in Efrat, and there was a program that he ran, Israelite, in the old city. So he became quite famous, but at the time he was my high school teacher. And at the time I recall him telling a story about something, a Jewish story meant to pull at the heartstrings. And I just cried and cried. And that was like a Jewish identity strengthening for me. I wouldn't have been able to tell you he was Orthodox, he was, involved in Kiruv. I wouldn't have been able to share that, but I certainly had a first, heart-opening experience. And then also in my high school years, I chose to go on an Israel trip. And I stood at the kotel and I said the hamotzi. Like, this was my level of Judaism. I benched, right? Like, that was my Hebrew. I said the hamotzi and I benched. So that was, right. So that was like my actual connection, was not very much. And then in terms of like understanding prayers and orthodoxy. And so.
But coming to Jerusalem.
Yeah, so fast forward. Yeah.
The Moshav Band, that was when you met Moshav Band and you found
exactly
that creative parallel?
Right. And at the time, I wasn't aiming to be observant, although I knew, there were outreach professionals all crawling all over Hebrew University. So there was Jeff Seidel was very active, and he had branches, everywhere on campus, and whoever was approaching me, I don't know where they were coming from, but I was definitely a candidate for caring about being Jewish. I wasn't closed. I was, happy to learn more. So I was a great candidate for them. And I just spent the whole year learning. But because of my music background, I also, every week I would go downtown to hear the bands. And I also was engaged in musical theater. There was Merkaz HaMagshimim had a community theater, and I played Audrey in The Little Shop of Horrors. I wasn't observant at the time. There's pictures of me from that era, and it was embarrassing that I'm standing hugging Rebbitzins, and the way that I'm dressed and the way that I would obviously look at that, from a religious standpoint now. But so I just took the whole year and I was just absorbing. And then when I came home, my parents said, "You're Orthodox." I said, "I'm not Orthodox. I just love Judaism." I just believe.
It was a gradual
very
process.
gradual.
There was no one moment.
No.
Right. That's healthy. That's nice.
Right. It was like, I continued to ask questions, and there were always answers, but it wasn't, I didn't feel pressured that I had been doing something wrong, but and in fact, it was extremely slow. Every choice that I made what's the next right thing to do. So should I eat shrimp at this non-kosher restaurant, or should I not order shrimp? Okay, I won't order shrimp. Okay, so then the next question is, should I not go to a non-kosher restaurant? But, by the time I was going to, even, I had a story where, I went to the grocery store and I'm completely, I'm Orthodox, I'm observant, I'm keeping kosher, but I just completely forgot to check the hechsher at the grocery store. I just didn't even have it on my radar that I was supposed to check hechshers before I brought home food. So I brought home kosher food. Food that just completely wasn't kosher. So it was just a slow process. But at a certain point, then I felt like I knew, I looked observant. I spent a summer checking out skirts, and then I made this transition. And, I was on a college campus where there was an Orthodox population at Columbia. And so one day I was wearing a skirt and the next day I was wearing pants. And nobody could figure out whether I was observant or not. But I came back after a summer and I was observant. And then I went to Israel to study. I mean, I actually pushed off. I thought that would be, a lot of people said, go to Israel. That's going to be great. And I said, of course it's going to be great. Who doesn't want to sit around all day talking about, Jewish philosophy? Of course it's going to be amazing, but that's not responsible. That's not a responsible thing to do, to just ride off into the sunset and talk about Jewish philosophy.
So the responsible thing to do was you were pursuing a performing arts major. Is that was the responsible thing to do? Is that where you were
I
heading?
wanted to be a lawyer. I thought of being
really?
a lawyer, so I just
I thought that you
I was
were
working.
okay.
No, at that point I had become religious. I transferred to Barnard, and I took those 2 years to become more observant. I went to ATARA, I went to Chabad on campus, and so by the time I graduated, I was observant. And the next step was, maybe going to seminary for a year. But so eventually, even my parents were like, you need to go to Israel. So then once I had that support, I took that and I said, great, okay, I will. So
where was your creativity through all this journey?
Completely underground, just
Okay.
just
So
absolutely. Like, I thought I'm
took a
not
back
allowed
seat.
to sing. This was, well, not only a back seat, it did take a back seat, but it took a back seat not in the sense that, oh, I'm going to table this for now and get back to it later. It was like, oh, if I believe in Torah and Shabbos and Hashem and the concept of, Jewish history and heritage, then I can't sing. This was like, I don't want to say that it was dead, but it was like, I gave it up. That was my choice.
That's absolutely huge. I mean, that's absolutely huge. That it's one thing to be born into, orthodoxy, religiosity, whatever you want to call it, and to be a female who wants to sing and says, well, okay, the culture that I have doesn't allow me to, and dealing with that struggle, and that's a huge, real struggle. But then to choose to take on this lifestyle, and at the same time to choose to never sing again, if that's what I call it, never to get up on stage again. That's one big commitment. That's amazing. I mean, it really is, that you're willing to give up part of yourself for your Judaism.
I feel so validated. I feel so heard. Like, I feel so seen. I really appreciate it. I just want to say thank you, because what is significant is that what I have always felt is misunderstood is for Balchuvas who are teachers and accountants. That's great. You can continue to be a teacher and an accountant. And in fact, the Jewish Orthodox community will love you and embrace you and bring you to their, exactly. Want to set you up with their children. But there has been a lack of complete appreciation for the notion that someone coming into Orthodoxy who has to give up what they were previously, there's no way. My partner in ATARA, Esther Leah, was studying to be a cantor. So she was in Berklee School of Music studying to be a cantor. There are people in schools of ballet, people who were performing on European stages, performing opera. Like, where do you go with opera, in the Orthodox community? So it's okay if you play the guitar and you have a scratchy voice and you want to lead a kumsitz. That's beautiful. But even for women at the time, it still wasn't that beautiful. But it's there still are these really. There are trained ballerinas and especially, let's just say that on Broadway, and if you're going to say that, Broadway is for a good percent of Broadway may be Jewish, or, the New York theater scene, or LA and the filmmaking scene, how many secular Jews exist? So is there enough in Orthodoxy to absorb that amount of Shomer Shabbos artists? Talent, because because that, if they're Jewish and the point is to enable them to appreciate Shabbos, then there you go. Like all of Broadway, needs to be, there needs to be a space for them in Orthodoxy. So the point is that there's a lot to give up. We're giving up an entire career, Shabbos, and then for women, there's also the stage space. But so anyone who's giving up a career that is the primary focus of their career is Shabbos, or the primary focus of their career is something that isn't endorsed by halacha. But I think female singers are probably like up there with those who give up their career.
Yeah, no, I've thought about it many times, but I think about it that I'm so blessed in my creative journey that I don't have a thing like being a female and getting up on stage. That I have not been faced with these challenges, and who knows how I would have responded to such challenges, because they really come down to the soul of who you are. You got to choose. You got to choose within yourself what is. It's not even what is the real you. It's a real choice of what does God want from you, and what's your purpose in this world, and how are you meant to give. I'm curious.
Well, I mean, at the time.
Well, were you giving up? Not giving up. Giving up is wrong, but was it done out of love? Was it done out of fear? Was it love for Judaism? Was it love for God? Was it, these are the rules, and if I want to belong, these are the rules I have to play by?
Right. It was both. So it's like brushing your teeth. So that's on the one hand, it's like brushing your teeth. You don't necessarily want to you're tired, you're sitting on the couch, you don't want to get up and go brush your teeth. But you don't want cavities, so you have to brush your teeth. So on the one hand, a lot of the rules just fell into that category where that's, right? Like you do it because it's part of the picture. Right. The concept of giving up the career, right? So that's a whole other, it's not just another one of those rules. And so I hear that you're distinguishing that, and I appreciate that. And that came from, I think, if you ask me like why I became frum, and I could tell you that it's probably the first commandment, Anochi Hashem. Not that I knew that at the time, but if I could articulate, what compelled me, is that if someone is saying I'm God, right? So like, unless I'm God, right? Me, Miriam Leah, am I God? Like, well, I'm not God. So, and I'm not a God, so I can't argue with that. Right. So Anochi Hashem just says like, I'm God, and this is what I say. So it was this suspension of God knows what he's doing. Like, if this is God, then right. And God, then I want to.
It's all consuming.
Right, and I want to be, meaning I'm the type of person that honestly on Valentine's Day I wore red, right? Like if I was Chinese, I'd be learning calligraphy. Right, so I'm Jewish, so I was. Bring it, like I want to.
You want to be all in.
I'm all in. I want to understand Judaism, and so I had that approach. And so if this is what God says, then God knows, because He's God, right? Like God has to know. But I don't want to say that the difference between what rabbis say and what God says are, two different things. But, that's after a journey. I mean, I guess you could like fast forward because you don't want to be here, like all night until the morning. I mean, I am a night person, but that's pushing it to give you every detail. But, fast forward to 10 years later, it was just like a realization that it's not possible for music and theater and dance to be like Isser Torah. Like it can't be. There has to be a way that these are mediums that are used to communicate, and they are powerful mediums, because if you go to Sweeney Todd or Little Shop of Horrors, you will be singing and dancing and clapping, and your heart will be open and you will be moved. And Kal Vachomer, I don't even want to include the Spring Awakening and all these other, musicals. But the lyrics that you're like singing about are being eaten by a plant, and a barber who kills people, and worse. So. Right. So the power of the art is it brings joy, it brings education, but the messaging could be Torah, and in that case it could actually be beautifying Torah, to bring out Torah through the arts. So I really I had this. That, if any moment, I remember I was in Passaic, New Jersey on a Shabbaton, and I distinctly remembered, I don't remember who I was talking to, but I was walking down a dirt path, like from one location to another, and I just remember being hit with these ideas. And so it was really just, there has to be a place for the arts in Judaism.
I mean, you were told that it's usher, or that singing and dancing is completely against Judaism, or that's just within the settings that females can only perform for a female audience, or over there nobody thought of it that way. It wasn't.
So, right. So the first was women can't perform, but then in seminary we were asked to put on a Hanukkah show and a Purim skit. And I felt that humor was more important than talent. It was really, almost making fun of, and if you sang well, it wasn't as funny, so it was almost more funny if you didn't sing well. And to me, it was disrespectful to the actual art. And so I went ahead, and there was another girl in my seminary yeshiva, we called it yeshiva, who had a background in the arts, and I had heard of someone else who played the guitar, and someone else, and I reached out to anyone that I had heard of from different seminaries, and I organized a fundraiser with for seminaries, girls who performed. Found a place, advertised, organized, raised 1,000 shekels for my yeshiva. And I was so proud, and this is pre-ATARA. And the Rebbitzin said to me, well, now that instead of wow, that was so beautiful. Thank you so much for contributing your talent. What amazing talent. How gifted you are from Hashem. This is such a beautiful, right? Thank you. We're so lucky to have you in our seminary, and, you're going to do so much in the world. And this is anything. Or great song that you sang. I really, I didn't realize you could do that. Right? No, so you know what she said to me after the show? And I'm like, hi, Rebbitzin, here's 1,000 shekels, that we just raised. And what did you think? And she says, well, I'm glad to see that now it's over. You'll show up in class tomorrow. And I was like, wow. I feel underappreciated. So there was that, and then I came back from seminary, and there was a school principal who was like, oh, we hear you sing, maybe you can sing for the girls. And I was like, yay, I'm gonna sing for women only. And then she said, by the way, it has to be Chabad Nigunim. I'm sorry to whistle blow on, and I lost it. All of the strength that I had fighting this and sacrificing or whatever, I literally was crying for at least a half an hour. I was just on the floor crying because I just you just hit me when I'm low. You took anything from me. So it's it was more than just
don't sing. It's one thing to say don't sing, but it's sing. Go ahead, do all your talents within this tiny little box I'm going to give you of these songs that you may or may not know.
That I don't know.
This is all you're allowed to sing.
Right.
That's not
exactly.
That's not
so that was It was. I mean, it made sense for their culture, and it's still. And I have my perspective, I actually believe that if on this whole, Chabad Nagonim versus, not, but that's a whole, I do have
It's not. This
a
isn't a
shita
knock
on
on
that,
Chabad.
but
This is not. This
right,
is not
no,
a knock
no,
on Chabad Nigunim. This is that this teacher principal
right,
equated all your creativity. Is okay. Now
exactly. It was just a mismatch.
She can harness your
Exactly.
creativity to what she needed, not here's a platform for you to come and create.
Well, and I wasn't looking to per se create, but
Right.
for me, it was right. Now
Well,
looking back, it was a
mismatch.
mismatch. I understand where she was coming from, but at the time I didn't. So that was a real blow, and I just went underground again, and I just, I was like, I was just really upset by that. And then I moved to New York, and I was a librarian. I studied library science because I figured, I also am a curious type. Us creatives are just by nature have curiosity, into for whatever it's worth. And so I became a librarian, and I was working as a librarian, and I was living on the Upper West Side, and I was, attending OZ and the Young Professionals Minyan, and went to the Wolanskis at the time for Shabbos dinner. And Rebbetzin Wolanski, she could take the credit for all of this future. She basically just said, it would be so nice if we had a theater club, at the shul. And I would just said, okay, I'll be involved, great, pick me. And then after Shabbos, I called and I said, listen, I want to be part of the club. And she said, well, nobody else has really stepped forward. And I was like, okay, well, should we give it some time? Yeah. I'm like, okay, let's wait a little bit, and you can let people know about it, and, let me know. So a week later I call back, okay, what's the story? And, she said, listen, why don't you just do whatever you want? I mean, you can create the theater club. So I said, well, to be honest with you, if I'm the one who is responsible here, I'd love it to be a musical, for women only. So that was the formal, informal for ATARA, but formal in terms of from that point forward, there was no looking back. That musical was attracted people from, I don't know if you are familiar with the New York area, but here it's the Upper West Side, and people came in for auditions and rehearsals from Queens, Brooklyn, New Jersey. I mean, this was like a women's only musical art. This was really, I think it was a novelty, but it was meeting a need. It was meeting
Yes,
a lot of
you very much were not the only one who was thirsty for this.
right.
It was definitely
So that's what I
others out
said.
there
Exactly.
waiting and looking.
Exactly. So, and that's what I said when it was over. We said, this, we're a community now, right? Like, we are a community. We are, right? This is real. People have an interest in this. They have talent. And then fast forward, I was working as a librarian in Boston.
Before you fast forward,
Okay.
I'm just curious, how did the public respond? Because
Also,
part of this is that you're, it's not a personal. Number one, it's a whole team, but number two is that you're literally on stage and you need an audience. So how was the response to that?
Okay, so first of all, by the way, speaking of team, Jessica Schechter, who had subsequently went on to work with Leah Gottfried in, well, they're now both married, but Soon by You, Jessica Schechter at the time was 18. She was young, and she was around, and she was going to NYU, or she hadn't yet decided to go to NYU, but so she was working on that with me. And so in terms of the team, that was really the early years. And the audience, so I think Miriam Lieberman, who was on the Upper West Side and now is in the Five Towns, she was involved in this also early production, and we definitely felt the electricity after the show was just, after the show, we knew this was 2006.
Okay.
So
That was a while ago.
we knew.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, of course I'm only 30, so yeah. Must have been
No,
when
it's
I was
okay.
like
It's
5 years old. Anyway,
So once
so
that happened, that
yeah,
like you knew this opened the floodgates. This is like Pasach HaTzinor, as they say in Hebrew, that you knew it was
right,
viable. You knew that there was something there.
exactly.
Was
So right,
it
so then it
was it
was yeah.
a was it a financial success, or was it a financial, was it would it work financially? Was there was enough there to keep on going? Like it was definitely passion.
Well,
It was definitely passion, but like this is something viable in some form or other.
so I had gotten a library job in Boston. So I this was
Right.
sort of like I was on my way out the door. So I was sort of
Right.
performing, and then like the next week I had scheduled the performance at a time when I was still in New York, and then I was pretty much leaving for Boston the next week. And so it wasn't like I was establishing a theater company, and I'm not sure they ever did anything like that again.
Right.
But I don't think it was a failure. I think that OZ paid for it, and I think that the costs were covered. We paid licensing rights. We unsuccessfully tried to write our own musical and realized it's, relatively
Harder
difficult
than
to
it.
write a musical from scratch.
Right.
So we applied for rights to one musical to adapt for the Orthodox purposes. We were rejected. So there are actually issues, in terms of
Right.
licensing
Right.
material. But then we found another script and we licensed it. So we were just, we weren't looking to do anything illegal, and
Right.
we
Right. Right.
but it was a wonderful experience, I think, for everyone involved and for the audience, and it showed everyone that there was potential here for
Right.
in women in acting and singing and coming together as a community and theater, obviously. So right. So I was riding on that when I moved to Boston, and then
Right.
ATARA essentially formed. I got to know Esther Leah, and yeah, so that's a different chapter. That's like chapter 2. So
Yeah.
that's
It's
until ATARA, pre ATARA. I
so.
mean,
So what is ATARA? So it's an acronym for something. But what was the vision for ATARA? What were you trying to achieve? What lack was out there that you felt you needed to fill?
so it was community. It was community. It was being greater than the sum of our parts. That was the like you know sub tagline, or that was in my mind. That was the carrot, the like golden, I don't know, the northern star, was that there was somehow, it's like the same way that I viewed Judaism, that there's a greater good, and if you can plug into the greater good somehow, that a community is stronger than isolated individuals who who may feel I'm the only one, I can't do this, there's nothing in Orthodoxy for me, I don't have anyone that understands me, so a lot of the stories were, I gave this up 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. I traded my, paintbrush for a broomstick or whatever, that is, that when I chose to become Orthodox, that was the end of my art. And
So
yeah.
to clarify, is ATARA only, well, not only, but is ATARA specifically visual arts? I mean, performing arts? Because as a visual artist, you could do your stuff in your studio privately, and you can post it wherever it is or isn't. You don't you don't necessarily need a community. Of course, a creative community is something that we all need, but as a visual artist, you can kind of get by without it. But that as a performing artist, you can't really, you definitely can perform alone, but it's more, when you're part of a company, a production or something where it's, more people. So was it more, who was it for? Who would, like, the fact that you were trying to create community as opposed to creating a production? Those are two different goals. Those are two different ideas.
So interestingly, in the first few years, I included men on the board and in the conference, obviously only in a setting where it wasn't compromising women's modesty, just on a panel discussion. Because to me it was, the arts aligned with Torah.
Right.
But for the most part, what developed as like the core passionate contributors sort of hijacked that idea, and everyone wanted, even the board should be women only, and because there was a more pressing need, and that's why the focus was on women and the performing arts, because that's where at the time that was the greatest area of need. And that was my perspective. My perspective was, I'm not letting go of the idea that anyone, a 12-year-old boy who wants to act or breakdance or, who knows, they are pressured into learning Gemara and they might have a hush for something else. But at the time, there was certainly, less support for women in the performing arts. And so, and also because of the value system in terms of Kol Isha, any programming that involved women singing had to be by default
Right.
exclusively women. So it
Right.
ended up being very focused on women's performance programming and support for female performers. But in the newsletter, I would promote anything in the newsletter. So an art exhibit or, a men's only film, but there wasn't as much. Let's say from the conferences, it then became explosive. I should say exponential in the
So
sense that,
what were these
oh,
conferences?
so essentially it was, right. The first one was like just a show. And then we had a meeting for people who had come in from out of town, and the origin of the show, I mean, obviously, has its origin, but we can skip it. But the crux of the conferences emerged from this, where we said after the show, with the collection of artists who had come in from other cities, meaning in any one city they might be the only artist, but once we're together geographically, we see we are a community. There are numbers. Now, we weren't many in number, we were few in number, maybe 12, 15 people were sitting at that original meeting. And we all lived in different cities. But we said, this one was a filmmaker. The other one was running open mic nights. The other one was a theater director. So everybody was doing their own unique work. But as a community, we said, what can we do as a community? We'll come together and there'll be performance opportunities and there'll be workshop opportunities. So we'll run it like a conference. And as I had been a librarian and I had been attending library conferences, so this was perfectly normal for me. I had been involved because I lived in New York. I had been involved. The Jewish Libraries Association had their conference in New York, so I was an instrumental part of the conference committee and the board, and I was bringing that experience now, applying it to, arts, and I'm saying we need to make a conference.
You believe that you could, that like you can just, okay, we'll make a conference.
Yeah.
That's a good amount of chutzpah. That's a good amount of chutzpah that you thought you could and you did and people showed up.
Well, I wasn't people say, oh, conference, it costs $40,000 and, you need a hotel and, I wasn't that type of conference, but it was structured, aside from the fact that our lectures are performances, so we can't just rent a hotel. We need a stage with a grand piano and a film screen, and there's equipment that's required for art lectures, so to speak, and presentations of papers. It's like they're singing their song. We need music, sound equipment, and lighting, and so it was performance evenings, workshops, so we had, but in this way that a conference runs, where there's tracks for different subjects. So we had a track for theater, a track for dance, a track for music.
It was very professionally put together.
Well, I was trying to tell you that it wasn't very professional, meaning
From the outside, it sounds good.
So interestingly, I mean, I suppose I skipped the part where I said, I was in musical theater, but I really, as you can see growing up, it's not like I was trained from my early years. I really like puzzles and math. I'm a big math nerd. I like, so this whole side of me, which is why like my art form became the producing somehow, is that to me this is easy, this is fun, this brings me joy to like schedule and pull things together and create it's not a work of art, but it's a product. So to me it was
What year was the first conference?
2007.
2000. Oh, so it's like straight up. And how often have you had conferences since then?
So 2007, 8, 9, 10 were like bam, 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 like power, By 2010, we were renting, what's that hall next to, it's like on 66th, 68th Street, Lincoln Center. Like there was like a hall that we could rent that was near Lincoln Center. We were like, okay, women only. We had women coming in performers came in from Israel, and it was like really explosive in terms of right. Well, because what happens is that when you bring people together from other cities, and all it was like, obviously it was exposure, was having the opportunity to perform for people who hadn't had performed in 20 years. It was learning different techniques in the arts and different, skills. It was coming together as a community and meeting and networking and developing relationships. But it was also empowerment and encouragement. So you go back to your community, and if you dance, then you are mandated by Hashem, like Hashem gave that to you. You teach, you open a school. You start, you have an ability in writing and playwriting. So we had, people who came from the first conference to the second conference, and they had decided to go into filmmaking as a result of coming to the conference, or go into, or open a dance school or whatever it was, or to form their own, group in their own city. And till today, there was one girl who came when she was a teenager. Her mother was an artist, and she was taking dance. And now, subsequently, she married and moved to a community, opened a dance school, and she serves more than 100 girls in her dance school. And now she does aerial silks and, acrobatics, and all girls, So whatever's happening in those communities then, So then after 4 or 5 years, what ended up happening is that we were competing with ourselves, in the sense that, right, so people now have Sunday programs, and it was much harder to find a good date for the conference, because all of the main contributors were running their own programs. So we couldn't do it in the summer because now there were summer camps, and we couldn't do it in the fall because that was, for the Sunday programs. And so we had picked a date in December, and we were gonna move out of New York. We were gonna do it in Pittsburgh because Amy Gooderson had started her seminary then in Pittsburgh, and I'm from Pittsburgh, so it's like, great, let's make this point that we're not all about New York. We were just picking New York because it was central, but let's move around, And but in New York, the benefit is that if something goes wrong with your location, there are 1,000 other locations that you can hustle to find at the date that you need. But at that time, there was one good location in Pittsburgh. Something came up after we had already confirmed, and then they had to change the date or whatever it was. And we couldn't recover from that because we had worked so hard to find a date that worked. So we skipped 2013, and then I was also getting up in years and older, single, and I said I need to produce my own life. Honestly, like I'm too concerned with producing these, art programs. I need to focus on producing, like my social life. And so I guess I focused on that, and then I got married, and I had to move to Montreal and had a baby. And so 2014 and 15, I was stepping back, and I was hoping that others would step up.
Right.
That was the whole point, was that it wasn't meant to be, even in all of the production, it wasn't meant to be my organization. It wasn't meant to be, it was a community. I was very collaborative in nature. It's just that at the end of the day, someone had to sign the contract, and someone had to, right, make those connections. And so I ended up being the person that did that administration, but I was just really hoping that more people would be involved. No one really wanted to, take on organizing a conference. Why not?
Right. That's a whole different. Well, you had the structural skills. Not everyone else was a librarian, and there were a bunch of loopy artists, and we know how easy it is to wrangle a bunch of artists together for anything. So. But what do you see as the difference? And you're describing, and like this high, and then some other years it didn't fall apart. It led to the next thing. So what are the other things?
Right.
What's the landscape difference today between,
right.
2006 and today?
Okay, so significantly around 2012 and 2013, after we had been, sort of like building for a number of years, there was a shift. Because the 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds who were emerging from childhood into who am I and what do I want to do, they were able to attend a women-only concert, a women-only movie. And that was a dramatically different culture in which they emerged into.
Right,
so you saw a real shift where then it turned from...
They were brought up with a narrative that you could.
Exactly.
You could do this. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
So all of a sudden you had... then there became the demand, it switched, that there was more demand than supply. So at first we were just working hard, but then there was a demand. Everybody wanted to take dance classes and voice lessons, and, there weren't enough schools and teachers. So that was one shift, that it was just the community was naturally expanding. And at the time, Facebook was, the place to be.
All the rage.
Right. So we started up on Facebook, and it was really like an unbelievable space where really there was chat and dialogue and people posting and dialogue happening. But then there was also Facebook communities came on the scene that were only exclusively Facebook communities, and this Kol Isha group started in Israel, and it was just like post yourself singing, and it exploded. But ATARA hadn't created that. We were like a community of we had built in person, essentially. But now you have this online community that's like anything goes, sing in your kitchen, sing off tune, whatever you want, dance. And it was just very explosive. So then that was the first time I felt like I had been like run over by a Mack truck, like after all of this like work uphill battle, and then someone else just came and ate the top of the melon, and I was like, oh, okay, I see how it
But
goes here.
you said a moment ago that it wasn't about you and it wasn't about your organization.
Exactly. No, it was just about the
You
effort that I was like, wow, we worked so hard, we fought so hard
right,
against, against the stream. And then now that it's mainstream, we're not really so popular.
right, right,
And I think a lot of people felt that. A lot of people in our community, meaning once it became popular, those of us who, like, I guess I'll use a few examples. Robin Garbos had been like the premier, she became Balchuva. She was a filmmaker in Hollywood. She made these movies in in Hollywood, and so it was from, what did you call it? Like Hollywood, right? And she was making movies for From Girls, and she had a camp. And then all of a sudden, like, there's this new camp in New Jersey, and all of the five towns and, Teaneck
right,
girls are going to this new camp, and they've never heard of Robin Garbos in California. And like
right.
the whole culture shifted, and it became New York centric. And once it became mainstream, then all of us Balchuvas and we had really been fighting to have recognition and work, and we had accomplished, but we had never been fully I suppose, embraced by the mainstream. And once the mainstream embraced the arts, we were just like losers. So all of us
That's so
sort of,
that's so interesting.
it was really
That's
sad.
so
And it's still sad because then Instagram took
right,
off while
right,
I was having babies and children, and I was just not getting 40,000 followers. So you
right,
had all of these new girls that were, right, started voice lessons at 11, 12. So now they're like 17, 18, 19, and they have 40,000 followers on Instagram. And again, like we're like late in the game here.
right,
So
right,
so we have no profile on Instagram. I mean, we have, a few hundred followers on Facebook, on Instagram, and Facebook is now dead, so forget about that. And so in social media, so what happened also during COVID is, again, I had a baby during COVID. I had a 2-year-old. I was, I just wasn't
go ahead.
we had a conference planned. I mean, go backtracking. There was interest 2016. We did a conference 2017, 2018. And I was just remotely working from Montreal, and we did it in Baltimore and Israel. And then we had one planned for 2020, but COVID, obviously. So, but during COVID, what ended up was another massive cultural shift, which is those who had been under the radar, who had been raising their families and, being moms throughout all of these years of ATARA, but they had been cultivating their voice and their, singing privately, being hired for bat mitzvahs. Suddenly, that was like the Bracha Jaffe, Chaya Kogan. She had been like on shlichut in Russia, and she had this gorgeous voice, but no one knew. So for many years, she was under the radar. But during this COVID, there was a new explosion of online music videos,
Right,
and that was just a massive a new watershed moment where now you have people viewing women only music videos. And Shandel, and what I was going to say is Shandel and Tellis was also in that initial group of like working really hard to get
yeah,
anyone to
yeah, yeah,
appreciate the
yeah,
art. And then all of a sudden, right, like Chaya Kogan got 150,000 hits.
right,
And it was like not fair, right?
right,
But Chaya Kogan deserved it because she is a gorgeous voice, and she worked her,
right,
she
right,
lived through all of that with nothing. And so nobody has any like, there's no tainas on any, like everybody. I understand that Hashem, everybody has a different journey. Everybody, but that was this shift where there were people
right,
that had been
right,
working really hard and sort of got left behind, because now as the shift became more mainstream and more like popular, so now those of us who were in the earlier years just don't have that popularity, and don't
Again,
have,
it's
yeah,
not.
but yeah, so that's where we
I
are.
hear you. I hear you. I hear
Yeah,
you loud and clear.
we've like coped. Everybody has to go to
Yeah.
therapy, and
No.
but someone gets
There's
paid.
there's a wise line that I heard from I'll mention his name. His name was Chaim New. He's now currently in Olam HaEmes. He's passed on. But I
Hmm.
remember in Melbourne growing up as a kid, and he was referring to Chassidus. We were at a Farbrengen on a Shabbos, and there were a bunch of kids who came from Mizrahi, and he was talking about some concept from Tanya, some concept in Chassidus, and he blew their mind. He like absolutely blew their mind of like this revolutionary way of looking at Judaism or looking at a mitzvah. I figure I don't even the context. I don't know what it actually was. And all the Chabad boys were barely listening. Yeah, we heard it before. We got a test on it last week. Like it wasn't, and
Mm.
to us it didn't. It kind of, and for them it was so earth shattering. And he said, that children of the
Mm.
revolution don't realize there ever was a revolution. And that's a line that stayed with me, and
Mm.
I think about it every so often. And I'd like to pull that out here. It's a little bit
Mm.
different, but and it's not so much about the children of the revolution not realizing the revolution and these young girls who are, filling, arenas with however many, it's amazing and they deserve it and their audiences deserve it, and they don't know the work that came before them, and they may know a little bit, and they may, and it's okay that they don't know. Like in this instance, it's okay they don't know. You
Mm-hmm.
can be, the older statesman, to look back and, sharing your history here. Like that statement that you said way back of, why did you choose? Did you give it up? Because Anoich Hashem Lekecha. So, within the perspective of Anoich Hashem Lekecha, the Eibishter knows. He sees the big picture,
Mm.
and you did, and you were incredibly revolutionary in the beginning, and you're still
Mm.
doing. It's not like you've hung up your boots. So
Mm.
you don't have, that many,
Mm.
or ATARA doesn't have as many views. But
Mm.
what you needed to do was done. What you needed to
Mm.
do, has been achieved,
Mm.
and there's always more to do. Don't
Mm.
don't retire. But
Well,
I,
now it's. I'm sorry.
no, for
Go
a
ahead.
short period of time, I had the creative soul,
Mm.
and we had
Mm-hmm.
a
Mm-hmm.
watershed moment, and that's
Mm-hmm.
gone. That's long gone. People don't even know that it exists. And there's like a
I
young
do.
group in.
I do.
there's a
Right.
young there's a young group of Havaria. I can't even pronounce what they are,
Oh,
and
Hevria.
and
Mm-hmm.
no, not Hevria. Hevria was
Oh.
wonderful. The Hevria came
Mm-hmm.
after Creative Soul, and then
Mm-hmm.
Havaria
Mm-hmm.
is like they remember
Mm.
Hevria, but they don't even know. They don't know the history. They don't know their
Mm-hmm.
their own creative Jewish, organizational history, and
Mm-hmm.
I have no need to say, but I
Mm-hmm.
was, I
Mm-hmm.
did what I did. I'm doing what I'm doing. We continue to push forward. We continue to have an impact. And the other thing is,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know my impact. And I've said it before. I have no idea, the impact of what I'm doing. But
Mm-hmm.
hearing you and hearing your story, you know, there's been an impact. We've been around a little while. Yes, we're still very much in our early 30s, of course, but we've been around a little while, and we've had an impact. And the fact that Atara hasn't packed up, and dissipated is proof that you were and you still are a powerful force, and there's still very much a need in the community, and it'll continue, and tomorrow's another day, and there's more creatives, and there's more 10-year-old girls that need to be impacted, and um,
Well,
so
interestingly,
power to you, you
thanks.
know,
Mm.
um, and you
Yeah,
make your kids
interestingly,
celebrating,
yeah. Well, that's interesting because right, my kids, like what's their cultural norm and who are they going to
right?
be when they emerge when they're 18 and 20? Because what I do see now is there are, oh my gosh, the talent of the 16, 17, 18 year olds now, 19, 20, 21, like the girls between the ages of 16 and 28 right now. So I don't even know, when they were born. So 16 years ago was whatever, my math. I don't even care. What time is it? 11:30. So, right? So it's 2024.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
So 16 years ago, right? So those girls, maybe they were born at this time of the revolution, but starting
Right.
from like these, they, like their talent is another level. No one has their, I mean, they are recording artist level. And so just recognizing that there's the next generation, and who's going to be the generation after that, and
Yeah. Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
like where.
It's going to go and keep growing. And two thoughts within that is one is the 4 minute mile. The 4 minute mile was a record that the scientists said it was impossible to beat. It was impossible to break the 4 minute mile. And then someone did it, and then another person, and now it's like anyone, not anyone, but it's nothing special to break a 4 minute mile. So the culture has changed, and there's a different story, a Torah story of I forget, I'm horrible with names and places and so on, but there was, maybe he was in the Arizal, I don't know who was really trying to understand a piece of Gemara, and he couldn't understand whatever it was, and not Gemara, whatever it was, but he worked very, very hard to try to break through. And finally he broke through, and he had this understanding. And the next morning he was walking to shul, and he heard a teacher teaching young children with the same, explaining it the way he explained it. And he was like, wait a second. He was, upset. I mean, like, I mean, it took me months to break through, and all of a sudden this guy is just teaching it to 5-year-olds like it's nothing, and he was almost distraught and upset by it. Again, I don't know if I'm telling the story correctly or not, but the lesson is there. But Bas Kol Yatsa, that he was told from on heaven that no, it was impossible. It was a piece of knowledge that was impossible, that you birthed into the world, but once you brought it into the world, it became accessible to everyone. And so these young girls with their talents, they don't even know what was before. They just look around and they say, well, yeah, the non-Jewish world has, all these things. Yeah, the Jewish world has it too. Why not? We can do this. We can get up and sing. We can, and all power to them. And so, yeah, it's the work that those who came before. But, we're...
Yeah. It's so interesting because I would just also tell you that there's some other piece that I went into, which was education. This was halfway through ATARA, and it's all like, even though so this is maybe just like even stepping, like going completely rewinding to years earlier. This is in the middle of ATARA, where artists were basically explaining that they had left Orthodoxy because there was no arts and no creative expression. And I was encountering a lot of a disproportionate, let's say, a disproportionate amount, from my perspective, of artists and deeply sensitive, thoughtful, spiritual, and brilliantly creative individuals that had this struggle with orthodoxy and being as an artist. And so I think that this is, when we're talking about the future, this is the only reason why I brought it up, is because we had veered into a conversation about the future, which is, what's the next like horizon in this, in like, what's still the need? What's the lack?
Right.
Where is there
Right.
still a lack?
So that was a thought that I just had, is that, is it art or is it entertainment? And there's a fine line between the two, and that's a whole other conversation. But, for those sensitive souls, it's art and it's expression. But, when it's, not only when it gets 100 million views, but, it crosses that line between art and entertainment, and that's a whole different conversation. And maybe for the consumer it's entertainment, but for the artist it's art. That it
Well,
truly is an expression of the soul.
but this is always a question. I don't think this has to do with being from or not and what it is for from people. Because there are certainly, artists who can make money drawing Hallmark cards. But that's great because then they can put food on the table through their art. And then there's also artists who don't care whether the audience likes it or not, because it's purely their expression, and maybe they will or maybe they won't ever be appreciated. Maybe they'll only be appreciated posthumously 100 years later. So in terms of whether for us as from observant Jews who are here, our first and foremost role is to bring, to be a keli, to be a vessel, to be why Hashem put us in this world, right? Like that, then it starts veering into mission. So you said,
Right.
mission in the earlier part of the conversation. And I was like, in my early years, I was not focused on what's my mission and doing anything because it's my tafkid, because it's my mission. But I've always had the sensibility of the like frame of mind of like what should I be doing right now? Where does Hashem want me? What is my, like just being like open to, and like, I don't know, you should never interview someone who's this old and this like brainless because it
I know what
literally
you're talking about.
lost my
I know
train
what
of
you're
thought.
Oh, okay. That's,
But like, what was I just saying? Like, what was the point that I was saying? I was saying something, but there was a point to it. I don't know, what was I just saying? You could refresh my memory. Anyway, oh my gosh, a bunch of altar
no,
cookies
mission.
trying to talk about
Whether or
it.
not you
Oh,
had a mission
right.
starting off.
Do I have a mission? So now, right. So, right. But why was I saying that now I have a mission? I don't know. It was like somehow, that there's that like now I feel more like empowered to have some sort of mission, but what is it? I don't know. All right, moving on. What was what was the subject that we were talking about? Because maybe I'll think of it.
Well,
But whatever.
I mean, I was asking of art versus entertainment.
Oh, exactly.
Finding
Exactly.
balance.
Art versus entertainment. Exactly. So that was the subject, is that, like, I because I'm trained in musical theater, I love what other people call music entertainment. To me, that's art, because it's music that moves my emotions. It's, there's always a modulation, and it's always like, about change and transformation. I mean, musical theater is a genre, and I love that. And yes, someone who is a Shakespearean actor will snob out anyone in musical theater and say that's not real art. Only my theater is real art. And so you're in, right? So what is art versus art versus entertainment? It's, do you care about the audience? And also do you care about an audience? For a performing artist, I mean, it's like you care about an audience. The audience is part of the art. You like live theater for me, for example, like I there's such a difference between performing either in a recording studio or, just around the house and performing on stage. There's literally a magic. There's
Energy, absolutely.
I like possessed. Literally, if I could share the experience, I am possessed. I literally get onto stage or a dance studio, and it's without volition, without will. My body just goes into the dance studio and starts leaping and dancing and twirling, and I go on stage and I must, it's just, it's like a chemical reaction, I cannot describe that. And so I do feel awful when someone says, "Oh, theater is about showing off." There's no will. This is literally just chemical, instinctual reaction. And so, so the difference between, is it art or is it entertainment? It's just a bigger question, because I wouldn't say that things are all art or all entertainment. It's the person. That's based on the person.
For you, it's art. For you, it's art, and however the person in the audience chooses to perceive it is up to them. And maybe what you show.
Right, I'm doing it for the art. I'm not doing it for the money, but yeah.
Right. No, not even money. Money's not even part of the conversation. But there are some people that show up to be entertained, and then some people show up with a more sensitive heart in their. A line from, and I'll send you the link, maybe the show notes, but an incredible piece of writing. The director of the I believe the Boston Conservatory, but one year his opening speech to the students and their parents talked about what is the function of music, and it's the most powerful thing. I used to teach it in Hebrew school when I talked about Devora, and I would choke up every single time I read it, but he essentially, he says that, he's talking to these, to be classically trained musicians, and he talks about the newspaper, and where are the concerts? They're in the entertainment section. So what is it? Is it art or entertainment? He has that same question. But what he says to the students, he looks at them and he says that at 8 p.m. one day, a broken heart is going to walk into your musical theater, and it's your job to fix them. And to me, that's so powerful. So to some people, it'll always be entertainment, but to some people, it'll be.
Well, there's also a layer of.
We're here to.
Well, first of all, arts are better than going to a psychologist, in the sense that arts are emotionally, they will change our emotions. They actually. This is. I don't know if this is science, but this is my interpretation of science is in terms of the beat. The reason why someone will say I like this beat because it is, I feel it moves me emotionally, is because it's the rhythm is at the same beats per minute as the heartbeat. And if you slow that down and it's slower than the heartbeat, then it actually calms the mind, right? So you can say that certain music is calming because you feel more calm because it's slower music, right? And it calms you. And then beats that are faster than the heartbeat energize you and get your body moving.
Right.
And so you can say that music is energizing and it's calming, right? They're two separate things, right? It could be calming, it could be energizing, it could be emotionally evocative, or change the emotions. But yeah. So the other, but I was also gonna say something else. I literally feel like we should not have done this interview. Unless I had a coffee, because I just.
You're good. Well, so you know what? Let's.
But I wanted to say.
It is late. But yes, if you have any other thoughts, but I do have one scripted question.
Okay.
I end these interviews. So we did talk about the youth and tomorrow, but what is your advice? What's your advice for young creatives? For them to find their orange socks, for them to find their own expression.
So, and I still want to think about what I was wanted to also add, but just my brain is not functioning right now. So I think that it's this new generation is there's no way to give advice for one to another generation, because our advice almost doesn't apply, in the sense that my advice for anyone is know that Hashem is with you, and that and that, so for a creative, develop your craft, develop your tool to its ultimate, capacity, that you don't know how good you can be unless you invest and develop that tool that you were given. So the more you put into, and if you enjoy it, if you enjoy what the art, or if you have a gift, then lean into it. And because no one knows what will be in 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, or 30 years from now. So, but what we do know is that Hashem knows, right? And Hashem sees, and that, so that's the only advice. And I guess the only point that I would have probably made before is what I wanted to say is that, using the other issue is, besides just entertainment versus art, it's using the arts as mediums to beautify the world, in Torah, to bring in Torah into the world, to, that sort of full circle in terms of not using the arts to just communicate messages that are entertaining, but that the arts are powerful tools. And in my opinion, bringing the redemption, right? Like, there's nothing more powerful than a Torah observant artist, because our language is we have the most powerful languages. Music, movement, theater, they're educational, they're powerful. Visual arts, so picture tells 1,000 words. And to use those powerful languages and those powerful tools to change people, to move people, to educate people, and then to use the content of Torah, the values of Torah, through these powerful mediums, this will change people. This will change the world. This will change. Yeah. So I guess that's why I see that the next generation maybe through, I think, religious artists will, contribute to the, bringing the redemption, and we live in a world of that we should, that what's the vision? The vision is a world. Yeah, that's the vision. Yeah.
That's it. To bring the
but to be in a world, this is for artists, this is the vision. The vision is to be in that messianic world, so we live 1,000 years, so all of our projects have, we can actually not feel like we're time pressured to accomplish all of our projects. That would be the messianic time. The messianic time should be a time where we're all artists, so we could just live out our one project after the next for the next 1,000 years.
Amen. Amen. Miriam Leah, thank you.
היום נעשה משהו בלתי נשכח